Alrighty, so this video will be for my second DevelopIt program that I did. This one I showed you my first one, which was my energy temperature program, and this one will be for my more game-like, my more app-like code that we have. The only thing I've added to the requirements is that for either program you can choose. Probably, though, it makes more sense to be on your more involved code, is to actually use one of the methods in section 6, array methods. Now that's besides array.push, because that one probably is just the base, the beginning level to where you're pushing data into an array. But some of these other like find index, getting the index, find, right, filter. And I actually used find and filter. And I'll show you that in my code. Okay, so make sure also that you're creating these in the right directory, DevelopIt2, and then you can start with the code from your DevelopIt1, but leave the code in your DevelopIt1 there, because especially if you're coming in to have that DevelopIt1 reviewed again. Okay, all right, so let me switch over to my editor. I've been working this morning on my kitty cat match, and I'd shown you a little bit of a preview in week 7 attendance, and I've done a little more work to it, but the idea here is that I ended up breaking my related task into an objects, and I called these objects game actions, and then I have methods on my game actions. Which is, what I pretty much had for the first round, which was just some of the, get random kitty, compare selection, and look up the kitty. So in this case, I added 2 other objects related to first player actions. And this is to check if a user exists and add game into my array. And this is the array.push. And this is the find method on the array. These are, like I said, this push is probably everyone will use this. It probably makes sense because it's just that basic one. But dot find was great, and understanding the returns here. I talked about that in the attendance. So if you want to check that out, go hear that. And then I did a filter, right? So this one looks in, and I'm passing the gameplay. So here's my gameplay object, which it's an array of objects. And in this case, it's username, date, and result. And in this case, all I'm doing is if there's a match, there's a result of 1. If not, it's a result of 0. Obviously, that's something that would change in the future. But I'm passing this in to my player actions. And for the exist, I'm also passing in email. And then I'm iterating over with the .find to see when game, what comes in, and by the way, I showed this on the attendance too. It's good if you're not sure what this is doing, the console log, that at least whatever you've called that function, and in this case the result of the .find, which is basically iterating over this gameplay array. Okay, so it's just good to do that to understand how what this code is doing. But also something I definitely want to have us do in the future is actually talk a bit more about, because I don't think he does it much here, is debugging, because there's ways to also within VS Code is to see what this code is doing, and I need to include that pretty soon. So just getting back to this, and then I have the add, which is just a push, and then I display games for a particular user. So each of these is passing in that gameplay array of objects, and in this case the email, and then we're doing a filter to say only show me the games for that particular user, right? So in this case I also gave a little documentation to when I'm running these methods, and I just lined them up because it was like I was just wanting to see this, right? So this is really nothing different than I had before, where I'm simulating the idea of gameplay. But again, this is going to obviously change as we get into the browser. And so that's nothing different there, except that I'm returning results here. And then here's where I've implemented my new, all right, so here's my player actions. And in this case, I look at player actions.checkUser, passing in an email. Now, the only thing I could have done, and I probably, if I was grading myself, mark a few points off because I have some logic setting out on the global scope. And, you know, it's something that we'll see more as we continue on, but we're trying to, in this way, block our logic into methods. But I was okay with just one if statement. And the reason I did that is I wouldn't want to add to my array unless I actually had a player, right? So I said if, right? So this is a truthy if player name. So the only reason I wouldn't have one is if I ran this and it didn't find that user. Now, when we do login, there's more involved. So again, I'm just simulating the idea to the best of my ability at this moment. But as you grow in your experience, if you do login, there are definitely standards that you can use, libraries, platforms you can use for that. But I'm just simulating the idea to get, because in this, if you haven't heard me say this, the idea here is to get you thinking about how your more app-like code would work. Not that it has to be perfect, because in my case, right, this is not something I would want to do out on the global scope. I actually could write another method, but I thought just for this, it's okay for me. So in this case, I only run add game if I get that, and then I did use, and this is one thing I want to see, is the results. So this is my kitty cat matches. So in this case, I actually used two things. I used a player name dot username. Now in this case, the reason I had to do dot username, and I could have played with this, but I decided to keep it, is when I'm returning, when I return here, if it finds a match, and if I return when it's not, obviously there's nothing to return, but it returns that value so I could at least check it, which is what I'm doing. But in this case, what was I saying? When I return user, oh, this returns a game, right? So, and actually this would probably be better if I actually return game here, okay? Because that's actually what it is. It's actually not player name. The player name is game.username. So actually, you know, let me see. Let's first see it run. So, you know, this is the kind of refactoring you do. So first, there's the results, and I didn't win, right? And this shows just that specific user's games, right? So I'm filtering by user. So in this case, I could change this variable to game. And I don't think I'm using that anywhere else out there. So let's see. And then I could say if game, right? That's just the variable that's coming back. I could say, in this case, game, which would make more sense, dot username. Let's see if that works. Ah, see, it's always good when you get an error. Game, oh, sorry, let me go back up here. Did I change it up here? If game dot player name. So, you know, this is the part of troubleshooting that you really start to have fun with. If, let's see, this is on 35, so it doesn't like my line 35, where I say, maybe it doesn't like it actually in this case. Okay, so I'll play with that code a little bit. It's not popping out at me what it is. But I bet I figured it out not too long after I quit, because that's kind of all how this stuff happens, right? It's like you do something and you're like, oh yeah, I see that now. If game, will I restore that there. Okay, so probably what I do is console log and see, because it must be, there might be something else setting out on the global namespace. I don't see anything that's there, although I'm returning game. It shouldn't, and it says reference game is not defined. Anyway, I don't have to take your time. That's the point of learning, right? The point of figuring out what code's doing so you can figure out where your issues are. So anyway, that's just my look at where I'm at with, again, I feel like this is 90% complete here, and it just gives you an idea about what my second one looked like. Just FYI, if you happen to be looking ahead, by the way, this is the week. I should be hopefully seeing many of you. I have released this section 7, part 1 and part 2. I don't have this one done yet, but remember, you have a week from Monday, right, to come see me. I probably will only take maybe 1 or at the most 2 appointments on the weekends, I try to keep all my appointments on the weekdays if possible, but sometimes I know my schedule doesn't work for you. But I've added one requirement here, which I think I'm going to use as part of our discussion here, which is just to have you do a little more thought about this code, because that's the one thing that you really can benefit from, is putting this code in your own words helps you really integrate that experience. But I think we're going to have a little discussion about that. So anyway, I'm going to see you later. Have a good weekend. Yeah, so of course, as soon as I quit recording, I figured it out, and I'm just going to show you. So in this case, I had said return game. So because game was actually used in this case, it's iterating over. It's actually grabbing each game as an instance on that array. There was a conflict, and it's like it's not defined because it's in the block scope. So I just changed this to game object, and then I didn't have to change anything about this because in this global scope that works fine. So was pretty easy to figure out. Again, once you're not trying to, perform, that's when things sometimes, which is, by the way, a really important note about stress, because stress can make you stop seeing and understanding the way the code works. All right, that really is it for me. Have a good one.